It was the hottest day in one of the hottest summers in Oregon history. I went out kayaking for the first time in my life, rolling on the Willamette River with one of my friends. On our way into Portland, we made an interesting discovery.
Wait, did you just find that? A watermelon? There's bananas all over the place. There's a banana over there.
There's an entire watermelon. So I took a bite of it.
See?
On the Willamette, sometimes you find funny things. But sometimes this is Oak Grove, Oregon, an unincorporated community some 5 miles south of Portland, wedged between there and Oregon City. Established in the 1890s, population 16,629 according to the last census, median age of 43, median income just over $40,000. The town's main claim to fame is that infamous Olympic figure skater Tanya Harding once resided here. I grew up here, lived on Lee Avenue for 17 years, went to school at the old Oak Grove Elementary, went to Buy Right Grocery every day after school, played ball in the school's field, rode my bike down the old trolley trail that went through town. Nothing much happens here. Average life, average crime, except, intriguingly, in the category of violent crime, where Oak Grove ranks far ahead of state and national averages. Such is apropos for the story you're about to hear, a story about a remarkable murder case that began in a rather unremarkable community. As I personally dove into this homegrown mystery, as a novice, I needed to speak with those in the know, and had the good fortune to take in a multifaceted discussion with J.D. Chandler and Teresa Griffin Kennedy, co-authors of Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland. In this 2016 publication, they discuss a great deal of crimes that happened in early 20th century Portland, including this little mysterious crime that started in Oak Grove.
And this is 1946, so it's the year after World War II ended. And to me, it's a really fascinating year in Portland because Portland really started to express its violence in some odd ways in 1946. My favorite case is the William Kapak, who was a disturbed war veteran who ran amok on Southwest Broadway and hit somebody in the head with an axe. The guy was standing in line at the Orpheum Theater and just got whacked in the head with an axe. It didn't kill him, but he was also a war veteran, and he said it was safer in the South Pacific than it is on the streets of Portland. And that you kind of see that if you read the Oregonian that year, you see that there's the slugger who's going around doing purse snatching, but he's a vicious purse snatcher because he punches the women, knocks them off their feet, and then steals their purse. And he preys on women between like 30 and 50. So he's going after kind of the average lady on the street, stealing their purse and punching them. He was known as the Slugger. We see the Pandora's Box murder that summer, where James Bowden blew up his wife in southeast Portland. So we start to see kind of a mean streak coming out in Portland. And you see that often at the end of wars. 1917 was one of our lowest murder rate years, but then 1919 jumped up with a huge bump, which you see at the end of a war.
This is Rivervilla Park, a small, serene place on the northern fringe of Oak Grove. On the edge of the park stands an old railroad bridge. Back in the day, this was the site of the Wisdom Light Moorage, a place for boats to be tied ashore. This is where it all began, April 12th, 1946. 3 locals, H.C. Foster and James and Mary Rader, decided to take a walk along the river.
A group of people walking by the Willamette River down near Oak Grove saw a burlap sack floating. And when they said they thought it might be a bag of drowned kittens.
Right.
Maybe they thought they could save them. I don't know why you would fish this bag to the shore, but they did. And it turned out it had a woman's torso in it.
This torso, initially believed to have been from a teenager, was identified as being that of a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s, standing between 5'2" and 5'4" tall. Weight, 140 to 150 pounds. The torso had been layered in clothes, including long underwear, a sweater, brown pants, and a topcoat. The sleeves of the sweater and the topcoat were missing, suggesting they were severed off with the woman's arms. The body had been tied up using rope and telephone wire, and then placed inside of a burlap feed sack that had been weighed down by sash weights. The mutilations on the torso appeared to have been done by someone who knew what they were doing. Oregon City Sheriff at the time, Fred Rieksecker, theorized the torso had only been in the water some 36 hours. However, it's known the victim had been murdered long before then. This finding blew up into national news. Brutal murders of this nature were not common, and with no internet or social media presence, murders of anyone who were not of prominence often didn't pass the point of local news. However, the brutality, the dismembering, the pure shock of this grisly discovery caught everyone's attention and was a frightening reminder of America's first known torso killer, who murdered more than 10 people in Cleveland between 1934 and 1938. The Cleveland torso killer, like the Oak Grove killer, was never caught. And perhaps most ironic, the Cleveland killer's first victim was established when the torso of an unidentified woman washed ashore along a body of water. Years later, history seemed to be repeating itself, and the citizens of Portland had to wonder if they had a demented mass killer on their hands. But this torso discovery was only the beginning.
A couple of people who were on the river regularly, and the Willamette was really a working river, especially down in that area. Yeah. And there were big log rafts coming down from a couple of different places there. So, and there's also steamboats back and forth there all the time. So the couple of people remembered seeing other burlap sacks in the river. They went and fished them out, and that's when they found the thighs, arm, several body parts, and they found them over those few days.
April 13th. 2 boatmen who worked along the Willamette River in Oregon City recalled seeing a burlap sack floating in the river almost a month before. They found the sack and fished it ashore, only to find the handless arms and right thigh of a body. Compared to the torso, these parts were identified as coming from the same woman. Furthermore, these remains had also been wrapped up in telephone wire and stuffed inside a burlap feed sack that had been weighed down by sash weights. These remains were found floating approximately 200 feet north of Willamette Falls and approximately 6 miles south of where the torso had been found. In addition to finding these remains, however, authorities stumbled onto something else as they searched this area in Oregon City. I'm currently standing along a stretch of railroad tracks owned by Union Pacific Railroad. On the other side of that is the Blue Heron Paper Mill, now closed, and just on the other side of that is the Willamette River. Now, it was along this stretch of river on the other side of the mill that the sack containing the dead murder victim's arms and right thigh were discovered on April 13th, 1946. Now, while I was trying to figure out exactly which side of the river the body had been deposited on, if you look back into older documentation, old newspaper reports, they reference that footprints found going down to the river, believed left by the perpetrator because they lead you right to where the sack was found. It's said that these prints were first found along an old abandoned railroad spur. Now, if you know this area, you'll know that on the east side of the river in Oregon City, right by the mill, there's a long stretch of railroad tracks right here. If you go to the west side of the river into West Lynn, there's no railroad tracks for miles. So even a novice can deduce that this is the railroad line that was being referenced when they talked about the perpetrator's footprints beginning near a closed down railroad spur. So we know that the perpetrator, in abandoning this particular sack into the river, walked right through this stretch over here to get down to the river to do his deed. Police had begun dragging the river in Oak Grove, looking for more remains, as the initial theory was that the remains of the whole body had been thrown into the river from the old railroad bridge. In finding these arms and thigh down in Oregon City, however, authorities spread their search, looking down Willamette River tributaries, such as the Clackamas and Tualatin rivers. The Clackamas River branches off the Willamette between where these two discoveries were made, and despite its search in the spring of '46, the case that was beginning to run cold had its next break right there. On July 27th, another burlap sack was found right there in the Clackamas River near the base of the John McLaughlin Bridge, spanning from Gladstone to the north into Oregon City to the south. Inside was the other thigh, the left, of the torso victim. But this was not the only discovery made there by the bridge. A bundle of clothes were also found floating in some driftwood only 60 feet from where this sack was found. These clothes were analyzed and were shown to be fitted for a petite woman and believed to have belonged to the victim. Receiving less press than the other discoveries, on August 15th, a small collection of hair with some scalp attached to it were found floating in the Willamette attached to a piece of log cable. This mix of hairs was discovered some 100 yards north of where the arms and right thigh had been discovered. These hairs were analyzed, believed to have also come from the torso victim. but without the head, the victim still remained unidentified. Then came October 13th. Two Oak Grove residents, a Mr. and Mrs. Roy Clutter, were walking along the Willamette, along the same stretch where the torso had been found months before. They noticed an object wrapped in newspaper and pieces of a shirt floating in the water and pulled it ashore. Inside, the head of the torso victim. This head had also been weighed down by sash weights and was in a moderate state of decomposition. The eyes were mostly gone, the mouth forced open. The woman's hair was dark brown with gray strands in it and had been curled tight and held in place by bobby pins. The right side of the head had been beaten so bad that the skull had been fractured. The coroner would later determine the cause of death to be a result of this head trauma. But beyond the cause of death, the discovery of this head made it almost a certainty that the victim would finally be identified, specifically through dental records. Her upper teeth were false, but her bottom teeth were still natural, despite having many fillings.
So this is the what's going on, and then they find the torso in the river in the spring, and then so all through the summer, people are wondering where the rest of that body is and who that woman was, and it's like this big mystery. And then they find the head in October, and it's like, okay, now it's time to know. We need to know what the answer is, and nothing.
Despite this apparent certainty that the victim would be identified after the head was found, over 70 years later, the case remains unsolved. No new discoveries have been made. The victim's lower legs, feet, and hands have never been found. Multiple individuals were investigated, but no solid suspect was ever established. By the 1950s, almost all of the evidence in this case had mysteriously vanished, leaving the case as cold as one can get. By the end of 1946 even, this case that was once national news had mostly been forgotten, even by locals. Today, the case is officially reopened, but with no real evidence left, and the staunch likelihood that anyone involved has long since perished themselves, there's little reason to believe this case will be solved to an absolute certainty. Still, the case captivates. Beyond its lure of being an unsolved homicide, the brutality of the crime and the fact that the victim was a middle-aged woman in the 1940s gives the crime a staggering representation as a paramount example of what women could face in the city of Portland back in the day. In what is today the epicenter of downtown Portland, decades ago, this was the city's hotbed of crime and vice. It was into this realm that many women found themselves fall in the early 20th century.
I talk a lot about this in two books, in Hidden History of Portland, and then again in our book, Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland. In the first book, I talk about the woman's experience as a pioneer. And then we talk about what we call the girl rush, which is a period of major female immigration to Portland, starting about 1905 and going up to about 1920 or so. When we saw, it started kind of small, but by the 1907 there were about 7,000 women a year, single women coming to Portland looking for a new life. And it's all based on the idea that women have been a commodity in Portland since the very beginning. The 1870s, it's like 20 men for every woman in town. By 1900, about 5 men for every woman in town. So women are kind of a valuable commodity. And so we see this inrush of young women coming to Portland looking for a new life. People like Louise Bryant, who became the Oregonian's first woman reporter and one of the great American writers. Beatrice Morrow, a young black woman from Texas who came to Portland in 1912 and was involved with the very first NAACP chapter west of the Mississippi. So you have a lot of women coming to Portland looking for new opportunities that were really available to them at that time, and available here where they weren't available in other parts of the country.
So because there were so many women coming to Portland and there weren't very many men, and there were some bad guys in Portland at the time. So even as early as the 1905 fair, there were men looking for young women to prostitute for brothels, and so it was a dangerous place in Portland. And when women became involved with brothels, they developed venereal disease, they developed chronic pelvic disease, which is a really painful form of multiple kinds of gonorrhea, and so they would often drink just to relieve the physical pain of chronic pelvic disease.
Opiates were really big.
Yeah, opiates too. Yeah, it was a dismal place for women that were not considered decent, and that's the other thing. We talked about that in the book too. Women really occupied two places in the world. They were either exalted Christian decent women, clean women, or they were dirty whores, who were prostitutes and had venereal disease and were alcoholics, and those were really the tragic women because alcoholism wasn't understood then. One thing that men often did back then, husbands, fathers to a degree, but to a lesser extent, and then a lot of brothers had their female relatives sent to asylums, and it was really easy. It was really easy to have a woman who had money and property call the authorities. She's crazy, she's hysterical, she needs to go to the loony bin, and then
she doesn't want to be locked up.
Right, then they would take them to the Oregon State Hospital, and then the brothers, the husbands, etc., would seize all their funds. They would go to the bank and they would take their money and their property.
Clearly, the most tragic aspect of the woman's experience in Portland many decades ago was the manner in which they were treated and exploited by men, sometimes to the point of their demise. From a past where countless women perished, this torso victim may very well be the most graphic representation of that dark time. From the moment the discovery of the torso was announced, letters came pouring in from all over the country, from as far away as Pennsylvania. Each one referenced a missing sister, or a missing mother, or a missing friend, a remarkable and tragic string of women who simply vanished during the 1940s. While this particular torso murder shined a light on violence against women, it has been rather lost to history, overshadowed by other crimes. While the last parts of the torso victim were being discovered, the city of Chicago sighed with relief when a troubled 17-year-old petty criminal named William Hirons confessed to 3 murders committed from late 1945 into 1946 that became known as the Lipstick Murders. The lipstick killings dominated headlines and fervently established itself as the murder story on page 1 for 1946. In the case of the torso murder, it would be almost forgotten by the end of the year. However, while it's easy to say this was the 1940s, criminal investigations were more primitive. Criminals could, quote, get away with it more often. Unsolved crimes must always beg the question, was it unsolved because certain individuals out there didn't want it to be solved? Despite the case being out of their jurisdiction, the Portland police were directly involved in the investigation from day one, which was coordinated by Clackamas County Police, and later the Oregon State Police. By the time of this murder, the Portland police had more than their share of a corrupt history.
These guys made, say 1921, right? About $100 a month.
Yeah.
That was the salary for an officer. If they retired, they got $30 a month.
So they all took money. They were corrupt. They took money.
First of all, they worked until they literally could not do the job anymore.
Right.
So cops would just stay at the job because, You know, what, you want to live on $100 a month, or you want to live on $30 a month?
Right.
There's your choice.
Right.
So keep the job,
Yeah.
no matter what. And then $100 a month is not really enough to live on, so you got to find opportunities to make expenses, and cops had a lot of those opportunities.
Yeah.
The culture was, cops didn't pay for coffee, cops got free food at certain places, you know, cops got paid off.
They also did things where, I mean, like during this time and even into the 50s and 60s and 70s, and some say even the 80s, they would just walk into stores and just grab cigarettes, candy bars, gum. You know, they just go over and, I mean, they might not take, you know, a whole bag full of stuff, but they would just go in and grab a couple of things, and the shop owners didn't say a diddly about it because...
Well, and where those happened is the shop owners were usually involved in illegal business. They had a slot machine, or they had a card game or a crap game in the back, or they were selling marijuana under the counter, or they had pornography behind the news rack. You know, the places where cops did that stuff were places that were making some of their money illegally, which was very, very common. It was, the culture was open criminality, basically condoned by the police. But if you were from the outside and you wanted to come and try and prey on Portland people, that was not tolerated.
Yeah.
And this was the whole attitude during Leon Jenkins' police bureau when he was chief. And it goes back further than him, but he really personifies it. And it was the idea that Portland is our town.
This era of Portland operated under prominent and yet infamous Mayor George Baker, who served as the city's mayor for 16 years. Regarded by many as a fun, charismatic figure, Baker's tenure also had a dark side, which included his establishment of a secret police force, which was more used to protect him and his colleagues than actually policing the city. Baker was also connected to illegal liquor operations, as well as accepting payouts and bribes. He was also famously photographed posing with members of the Ku Klux Klan. Some have even theorized that Baker was a member of the Klan. And in order to keep Portland, Portland, Mayor Baker brought on bootlegger Bobby Evans, who helped operate the city's secret police. At one time, prominent Chicago gangster Al Capone tried to muscle in on Portland's action, but Bobby Evans and his police connections were there to keep him out.
My favorite example of this comes from, I think, is 1933. So very late in this. It has been going on for quite a long time, because Jenkins is not even chief anymore by then. But it's a famous California criminal known as the Midget Bandit. He was from Fresno. And there's a great connection. It's on my Weird Portland blog because it's connected to Dashiell Hammett, because Dashiell Hammett knew the Midget Bandit when he was in prison. In fact, he was a detective who transferred him to one prison to another. And then when he wrote The Maltese Falcon, the character of Wilmer is based on this Midget Bandit. But the Midget Bandit came to Portland in 1933. He was escaped from a reformatory of some kind. He was with a partner, and they were on their way to Seattle, is where they were going. But they obviously ran out of money in Portland and thought they would hold up a pool hall. And they went into a place down on Northwest 3rd. I don't remember exactly where, but they robbed a pool hall, and it did not go well for them. The guys in the pool hall beat them severely. And the police arrested them, and both of them had legal trouble in Portland ever after that. And they got out, as soon as they got out of jail, they headed for Seattle, and they said they weren't ever going to come back to Portland. That's how Portland worked. So the police bureau is also a part of this, because at the time when Bobby Evans was keeping Al Capone out of town, he was relying on the police bureau to handle the liquor business, because there was a lot of liquor coming through town. Prohibition started in 1916 in Portland, and so by the time national prohibition came in 1920, we were really good at smuggling booze. And it came in a couple of different ways. A lot of it came in by boat through Salvies Island and St. John's, and then also a lot of it came in through the railroads, especially the Southern Pacific from California.
Shortly after taking office in 1917, Mayor Baker brought on Leon Jenkins to be his chief of police. Both men would hold their positions until 1933, and like Baker, Jenkins was highly regarded, but also corrupt. He elevated a lowly motorcycle officer named Frank Irvin to head of the traffic division before putting him in charge of dealing with the dirty work the police were involved with, primarily illegal liquor operations. Now, while most of these players would be either demoted or moved out of the picture entirely, their experience here during the 1920s and into the 1930s has returned to prominence in recent years, in particular in regards to this torso murder case.
When I came back to Portland 21 years ago, and I started looking at the police chiefs, there were two police chiefs who were absolutely revered, like saints of progressive policing. And they were two Portland police chiefs, Leon Jenkins and Harry Niles. These were the guys. They brought in all the modern investigative methods. They brought in radios and car patrols and motorcycle patrols. They brought in educated police officers. Harry Niles demanded college education for police officers for the first time in the 1930s. So these are the saints of progressive policing. And Leon Jenkins was a very controversial character. He was a very corrupt character, although he managed to keep that secret for a long, long time. So nobody knew the depths of his corruption. But they did know this guy's dangerous and he can't be chief anymore. And so they took him out as police chief and he took over the night watch at that point. Now Niles, I don't know, I haven't found anything really bad about him, but I haven't looked that hard. But maybe he is a saint of progressive policing. He really did some good things for the police bureau. So did Jenkins. But he had two young officers, Jim Purcell and James Fleming, to do his dirty work for him. And so 1946, Niles is an old man at this point and really sick. He died. In fact, he died before the spring. So it's definitely the end of Niles that year because he's dead. But Purcell and Fleming are like rivals for that power when he dies, and they're both thinking that they're going to end up as chief of police. But Jenkins is the one who does end up as chief of police. And I would really like to know, and I don't know, the political maneuvering that went into that.
While chief of detectives Jim Purcell was passed over in 1946, he would later become the chief of police in 1953. But in his detective capacity, he was well known for derailing investigations. And considering the fact that Portland police were directly involved in the torso murder investigation, and the fact that the investigation practically died by the end of 1946, there's reason to believe that Purcell and his influence could have been used to quash things.
And this was standard operating procedure for Jim Purcell. For his whole career. He was really good at this. And in Portland on the Take, we talk about how he did it with the Podlish and Schultz case. But he definitely knew how to do this. And if anybody could stop an investigation by a county sheriff's office, Jim Purcell certainly could. Now, he didn't have as much pull with the Oregon State Police, and that's why they continued to investigate for many years. But they were really running off in wild directions.
By all accounts, the primary investigation, conducted by Clackamas County, was a diligent one, and yet even the discovery of the victim's head in October of '46 was not enough to identify the victim. The victim's upper teeth were fake, but her bottom teeth were original, with fillings. Authorities celebrated this head discovery, certain that a dental examination would finally prove who this victim was. However, with no explanation at all, this identification process was never reported. To add further suspicion, in 1969, Oregon State Police Captain Vane Gardain, who ran the state police's case on the torso killing, expressed that the reason the victim was never identified was because her head was never found. The question then looms as to why a state police captain would lie so blatantly to cover up for such an important question. But the lack of an identification via dental records isn't the only aspect of the case that warranted further inquiry. Inquiries that were never pursued.
There's also the story of the informant. This goes into the police file. The guy that was the known courtroom character.
The guy who got arrested.
He called from a payphone near the Hamilton. He said he knew the whereabouts of the person who had killed the woman who was the torso. They took him downtown. They interrogated him. They held him, I think, overnight. They beat him up, and then they got rid of him. I mean, what does that tell you? That tells you, you know something we don't want to get out, so shut the hell up. We're going to kick your ass, and we're going to threaten to kill you if you don't keep your mouth shut.
This informant claimed to know the identity of the torso victim and where she had been dismembered at. While this unidentified informant has been dismissed by history, there was never a full resolution to his story. In all the reports on his call and apprehension, his account of events was never fully disproven, but rather the police simply said they questioned his story. Another element to this case that was conveniently swept under the rug.
The other thing that's interesting is I believe it would have been where the first parts of the torso were found, so that was where there's a cabin. And in the cabin, some police found a brush with hair in it, yes, and a bloody butcher knife. And I still need to go back to the police files and do some comparison contrast.
And they never knew for sure that it was connected.
But the thing I remember reading, I believe, was that in that area there was someone who lived nearby, and he grew spinach and potatoes. And spinach and potatoes were found in the stomach of the torso victim.
I find this cabin aspect of the case really intriguing, and it was a piece of information that I did not know about when I did my preliminary work investigating the case. This was new, but it wasn't just the fact that it was new that had me captivated, but it was what it meant if the torso victim was kept in this cabin. It apparently was located in Oak Grove. It was really close to where the torso was discovered. The exact same food was grown close by that was found in the body of the torso victim. The odds of that happening are exponentially small to argue that there wasn't a connection between the two. But it makes you ponder what was going on in those final days, because you'd think if this was merely a crime of passion, she just got attacked and brutally murdered and cut into pieces, that doesn't fit if she was in this cabin. It likely means that this person was grabbed off the street from their home, however it went down, and they weren't murdered right away, but rather they were kept somewhere with someone keeping an eye on her before the final decision or the act that was pre-planned. They knew they were going to kill her and dismember her and deposit her in different places. However it came about, she was kept somewhere and kept alive, taken care of almost, if you will, before she was just killed off. In the realm of physical evidence, one of the most baffling aspects of the case was that within a couple of years of the murder, almost all of its physical evidence had disappeared. The jawbone, the dentures, the clothing, everything vanished without explanation. In terms of the torso, unlike the head, which showed clear trauma, University of Oregon pathologist W.C. Hunter examined the torso and determined there had been no criminal assault on it aside from the dismemberment. However, this is known to be inaccurate.
And we don't know how long the woman was held. We do know that she was held for a while and that she was tortured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sexually tortured.
Yeah.
burned with a blowtorch, actually.
Burned with a blowtorch in the pelvic region.
Yeah.
Amidst the numerous missing persons and lost loved ones reported as leads to the police, not all of them had their files closed. And others were missing women who were never considered at all to possibly be the victim. This includes a woman named Eva Pankow, who went missing from southeast Portland in 1944.
It's kind of shocking and sad to see letter after letter after letter of women who are missing and whose husbands were abusive or potentially dangerous. Because it's just over and over and over, and it's a very sad story.
Eva Pankow worked up in the shipyards in Portland during World War II. She met her first husband there. They got married. It was a tumultuous marriage, ended in less than a year. There was threats of violence, threats of abuse. And after the two married, they actually relocated here to Oregon City, which is kind of interesting considering the fact that some of the body parts of the victim were found right down by the river here in Oregon City. Eva Pankow went missing in 1944, almost 2 years before this torso turned up, which leads people to believe she probably wasn't the victim. Where was she during all that time? No one could say for sure, but all we do know for certain is that by 1944, Eva Pankow, after buying a home in southeast Portland, the house went up in smoke one night, and she hasn't been seen since.
And nobody ever looked for Eva Pankow. Nobody ever mentioned the fact that Eva Pankow was missing.
Wow.
But I think Eva Pankow was murdered. I don't think she's the torso victim. And I don't remember why. Oh, because she was missing an eye.
Right.
She was missing an eye, and the torso had both eyes before it went in the river.
The remains of both puppets.
Yeah. But that's a fascinating case and probably a long-forgotten Portland murder.
Yeah.
On April 16th, 1946, 4 days after the torso washed up on the shore here, the Portland police received a call from a woman living in Los Angeles inquiring about her sister, Bessie Nevins, who she hadn't seen since 1943. But she received a call from a guy who claimed he was a cousin of theirs, who said that he was with Bessie and he was taking her up to Oregon where they were going to get work on a ranch. This sister in LA, that was the last time she ever heard anything about her sister Bessie, and her whereabouts pretty much since 1943 are pretty much unknown. She thought that maybe Bessie was the torso that rolled up on the shore here, or floated around the river out here. And the police sent her letter to the state police because this actually isn't in the jurisdiction of Portland, and it seems that's all that really happened. Back during this time, the Portland police, the crooked Portland police, and, bootleggers, racketeers, gangsters around here were involved in several illegal frontiers, racketeering, prostitution, illegal liquor sales, and so on. They were also involved in the running of many ranches out here in Oregon, which reportedly that's where Bessie Nevins was heading the last time she was heard about. So is it possible that she got mixed up with the wrong people and those people had to take care of her, and in the end it was Bessie Nevins' torso that was left floating out here on the river? Again, it's hard to say. One of the most intriguing of possible victims in this case, in my opinion, is a woman named Marion Coffey, who lived in the Beaverton area and frequented the Tillicum Tavern, seen here. Marion's husband, Alton, was jealous, abusive, and had threatened her life multiple times. Despite his aggression, Marion was a barfly who hooked up with several men, likely stoking her husband's jealousy. She was last seen on March 18th, 1946, right around the time that the torso victim would have been killed. On April 16th, days after the torso discovery, Alton barged into the Tillicum, showing the tavern's owner a newspaper with a story on the case, and claiming he believed the victim to be his wife. He reported her as last being seen with a Willis Baker of Oregon City. One might think this was the behavior of a guilty man, passing off the disappearance of his wife on another man. Similar to the torso victim, Marion Coffey was 50 years old in 1946, stood at 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 140 pounds, and had dark hair and false teeth. Considering these striking comparisons, it's a wonder she wasn't near the top of the list of possible victims. After Alton reported his concerns, it's shown in police files that they intended to look into her further, but never did. It's a complete wonder as to why this never happened. Only one woman ever came up as likely being the victim in this case. Her name was Marie Diffin. Leading a transient life with her abusive husband George in Southern Oregon, Marie, like Marion Coffey, was a barfly who ran off with several men and ultimately fled George's grasp in 1944, reportedly heading north to Portland, where her family lived. She never made it, however, and in 1950, 6 years later, George finally reported her as a missing person. With the timing and the fact that Marie was headed to the Portland area anyway, she immediately hit the papers as the possible victim. However, in addition to her age, in which she was still in her 30s in 1946, there was another issue with Marie Diffin as possibly being the murder victim.
She's definitely a murder victim waiting to happen, and I would not be surprised at all to hear that she died violently. Yeah. But she's not the torso case. She was last seen in Klamath Falls saying she was going to go so far away they'd never be able to find her. And so far no one has.
The combination of a corrupt police force with the notion of a forgotten, vanished woman now comes more clearly into focus. However, none of these aforementioned women had police connections. No reason for the Portland police to get involved in covering up their deaths. In fact, there's only one woman that fits both sides. Never considered as a victim by authorities, in March 1946, a 63-year-old woman also vanished, never to be seen again. This woman was named Anna Schrader.
Yeah, Anna Schrader came to Portland in 1910 with all of these same opportunities open to her. She was a married woman, possibly divorced. It's unclear whether that marriage actually ended. She might have even been a bigamist.
One of the documents I looked at when I was on Ancestry.com, one of her documents pertaining to when she lived in Minnesota, and you have to look at it to actually see what it says. And it said she was married when she was 18, and she came to Oregon as Anna Farney,
right?
And that was her first married name.
And she got married fairly soon. Mm-hmm. She married Schrader, in 1912?
I believe it was 1915.
Maybe 15, okay.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the opening of things for her.
Yeah.
And part of it was the status as a married woman.
Yeah.
Because as soon as she was married, she had social status.
Right.
She could join the Women's Club.
Right, the Women's Club.
And the Multnomah County Republican Party.
Right.
All of these organizations that she had wanted to be a part of, but as a single woman she was excluded from, were now open to her, and so she started to take advantage of social opportunities. Mm-hmm. She ran for Rose Queen.
Yeah.
This is the period of her life that I find most fascinating, when she ran for the Rose Queen and she swam in the Willamette River on Christmas Day for the polar bear swim, and she really started to gain some notoriety. People in Portland started looking at Anna Schrader as some special person.
Yeah.
And that's what she wanted. She wanted to be recognized as special.
Yeah.
And same year she met Bill Bruning.
William Bruning joined the Portland Police and became a patrolman in the second decade of the 1900s. He served overseas in World War I, and after his return to the States, he worked his way up to the level of lieutenant. With a wife kids, an impressive job, good looks. William Bruning seemed to have it all.
He was sergeant on the South Portland
I think so.
beat. I remember
And
that
he could speak.
because he was a Yiddish speaker.
Right, he could speak Yiddish. And there's that article, that funny article of the Yiddish family, and it's almost written like fiction. I mean,
It's a funny story. It's about the refugee family is staying at somebody's house in South Portland, and one of the kids wakes up screaming in the night, and everybody thinks that it's a police raid and they're all being arrested, and everybody goes insane, and there's chaos and yelling, and somebody finally calls the police, and the police can't talk to him because they're speaking Yiddish.
Right.
And they finally get Bill Bruning out of bed and drag him down to South Portland, and he explains what's going on, and everybody calms down. It's a crazy story, but that's what South Portland was. South Portland was the immigrant neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yiddish and Italian and Greek were the main languages spoken there.
Within 5 years of Bruning and Schrader meeting one another, they began an affair. Officially, it began in 1921, but no one can say for certain when it really started. Like many adulterous couples, the two frequented hotels around the downtown Portland area, like the Cornelius, seen here. This is the Brooklyn Rail Yard in southeast Portland. This is where Anna Schrader's husband, Edward, worked during the 1920s. And as Anna and William's affair grew even stronger, meetings in downtown hotels turned to evening rendezvous at Anna's apartment house while Edward was at work. On multiple occasions, Edward would come home early, almost catching his wife and her lover in the act. But somehow, Anna and William managed to keep their affair a secret from their significant others for years.
So I'm sitting at the approximate location of where Anna Schrader's apartment house was located. Right here in the midst of the Rose Quarter. This used to all be residential, and it was all knocked down to make way for the Memorial Coliseum located right over there. This street right in front of me was the approximate location of where Ross Avenue was, and Ross Avenue was the location of Anna Schrader and her husband's apartment house. And it's so wild to just look at imagery of that time and then look at it now, and nothing is the same. This here is one of only two remaining short stretches of Ross Avenue since a lot of the street was demolished to make way for the Memorial Coliseum. And what's very interesting about the fact that Ross Avenue cut right through here is that if you look directly in front of me, this is the Triangle Feed Mill located here in this industrial part of the Elliott neighborhood. What's so interesting about the fact that this building is so close to Ross Avenue is the fact that more than one of the burlap sacks that body parts were found in back in 1946 were bags produced here at the Triangle Mill.
Believed to have been done to help conceal the affair, Anna obtained a job with the Portland police as a private investigator, a position a woman rarely ever obtained, especially back in the 1920s.
And the first thing that attracted me to Anna Schrader as a character in history was when she was referred to in the Oregonian as a private detective.
Yeah.
I thought, what the hell? A woman private detective in the 1920s? What? I've got to know about this.
Yeah.
She's a kind of a glorified confidential informant is what she is.
She was, definitely.
Yeah.
That's what Don always said,
Yeah.
that she was a confidential informant.
Exactly. She would go drinking, and she would write down the names of people that she drank with, probably, and then pass that on to the police, and they could use it for blackmail. This was the mayor's secret police, is what they actually called them that, and it was a whole. What does Floyd Marsh say? He said he had someone to take care of any job up to murder.
Jenkins? He said that about Jenkins?
He said that about himself.
About himself,
Yeah.
wow.
And he says that he didn't go as far as murder, but I know there were people who would do murder.
Sure.
We proved that on the Podless and Schultz case.
Sure.
You know, that definitely happened.
Yeah.
And police murder, all you gotta do is look at the 70s in Portland to know that definitely happens in Portland.
Yeah.
So this is what her private detective was. She was a confidential informant, basically working for the mayor's secret police, which was more than anything a blackmail operation.
So not only was Anna Schrader getting a first-person perspective as to the crooked workings of the Portland police, but as the years went on, it appears William Bruning was beginning to see the writing on the wall.
And I think that William Bruning allowed her to do this as a way to keep her busy because she was starting to pressure him to leave his wife.
Yep.
And I can't remember.
Well, that's what she wanted. She wanted to be married to Bruning, even
Right.
though her husband was the greatest man in the world.
Right. Right. Her railroad husband was the greatest man in the world, but she would have been willing to trade him in for Bruning.
She would have been more than happy. Schrader would have been out on his ass in a minute if
Yeah.
Bruning would have left his wife.
Yeah. And he wasn't about to leave his wife and child.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Bruning is just getting laid.
Right.
You know, you got it. And she was an exciting woman. She was an attractive woman. She was exciting. She wasn't the stay-at-home wife type.
Yeah.
You know, she jumped in the river to go swimming. She liked to go drinking in speakeasies and turn her friends in to go to jail.
With conditions deteriorating, tensions peaked in late August 1929 when Anna, reportedly to protect herself from a now abusive William, borrowed a gun from a police friend and went to confront him. William came home, saw the gun in Anna's hand, and attacked. Amidst the scuffle, the gun went off twice, never hitting anybody. William took control and slammed Anna to the ground so hard that he fractured some of her ribs. The scandal broke. The police immediately sided with Bruning, and Anna was hauled off to jail for intent with a deadly weapon. The two turned on each other immediately. Anna was the scorned, abandoned lover, while William was the upstanding citizen victimized by the crazed other woman. Despite the truth coming out, Anna's husband Edward stood by her side, ultimately filing an alienation of affection lawsuit. The scandal was major news for years, one of the biggest scandals in Portland history. But while William Bruning faded into obscurity rather quickly, Anna Schrader stayed in the limelight as an avid supporter of the 1932 recall against Mayor Baker. She even threw her own hat into the ring for a while to replace him. But what really kept Anna Schrader in the limelight was the betrayal she felt from the Portland police, specifically Police Chief Leon Jenkins, whom she looked upon as almost a father figure to her. This betrayal sparked revenge, as Schrader claimed to have extensive knowledge of the criminal activities engaged in by Portland's police force, and she wasn't afraid to use it. That's when things began to change.
she had been like the city's biggest gadfly.
Yeah.
She ran for mayor. She ran recall campaigns. She got kicked in the shins at a public speech.
By those women, those hussies.
People fired bullets through her windows,
Right.
threw bricks through her
And then the
windows.
police said it was a cactus falling out of an upper window.
That was just stupid.
magically defied the laws of gravity.
That was just stupid.
Oh.
So some of the police were on her side because she could get parking tickets fixed, and that was a thing.
John Cordes.
They gave her a parking ticket every time they saw her car. That
Right.
was standard police procedure in those days, and it was because
Right.
Frank Irvin ran
She was being harassed.
She was being harassed.
This was after the affair ended in 1929.
Threats became commonplace for Schrader. Her home had been assaulted multiple times, and she'd had multiple mysterious car accidents. Clearly, some people didn't want her to talk. The women who attacked her in the shin-kicking incident happened to be connected with Bobby Evans and his crooked organization. These threats appeared to work, as by the mid-1930s, Anna Schrader had vanished from the public eye. But still, she would never cease to be a threat to the Portland police. She never did reveal what she claimed to know about the police and their crooked history, leading many people to disbelieve her claims. However, there is proof that she did know details and that she was a legitimate danger to Portland's police force.
You know, when we were doing research for this book, Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland, we had to look through a lot of old police files. And JD sent me a whole bunch of newspaper articles from the Oregonian. And one thing I learned, which just made sense, is if you've got names, you've got to look those names up in the police personnel files if you can. So I did a lot of checking up. I checked every police officer who was listed in any of the articles, and I found this one patrolman who was kind of a nobody patrolman named John Cordes. And one of the fun things about research is when you find something unexpected. And you know, Jenkins' personnel file and Irvin's personnel file, you know, these guys knew that that their personnel files were being maintained, so they sanitized them on a regular basis. That's what corrupt cops do. So, but what they forgot is that the secretarial pool includes a copy of any kind of a report. They include a copy into the file of the officer that has written the report, the officer or chief that the report is going to, and the officer who the report may be pertaining to. So I looked in Irvin's file, and I couldn't find anything. I looked in Jenkins' police chief file. I couldn't find anything. So I went to John Cordes, this nobody patrolman, and I found 2 letters that Frank Irvin had written to Chief Jenkins that were really incriminating, that were about Anna Schrader. And that was one of those super exciting aha moments, and my heart's beating, and I'm like, oh my God, JD's going to want to hear this, you know.
Real clear evidence that
Yeah.
Jenkins knew about the
Evidence.
liquor being run through Central
Yes.
Precinct,
Yes.
and that he was being kept informed in
Yes.
detail about this bitter war that was
Yeah.
going on with Anna Schrader.
Those 2 letters were huge. It proved, just like JD said, it proved that bootlegging was going on out of Central Precinct, out of the old headquarters building.
Jenkins knew about it.
And Jenkins knew about it. You know, those 2 letters were huge, and they sat in that little file in John Cordes' pathetic, paltry little police file, because he was a nobody, do-nothing cop who was friends with Anna Schrader. So he was...
And so his career was not possible to go anywhere.
Yeah, he was just a do-nothing guy, just doing the least amount he could, waiting for his retirement, you know, and there it was for 70 years. Those two, you know, copies were in his file, just waiting to be discovered.
For over a decade, Anna Schrader lived in obscurity, clearly never losing status as a possible threat, as long as she was still alive. By 1946, she was in her early 60s, and only days before her 63rd birthday, on April 5th, she disappeared forever. This is significant, as she vanished during the exact period that it's believed the torso victim was murdered. But beyond that coincidence alone, there was further reason to explain perhaps why it wasn't until 1946 that Anna Schrader would finally meet her demise.
Anna had been this big, dangerous, scary thing.
Yeah.
and then she wasn't for a long time. And we're getting into fantasy here. This is my fantasy of what happened. Is Anna Schrader saw that Jenkins was going to be the chief of police, and she flipped.
This is a good theory, though.
Yeah. She was probably pissed.
Absolutely.
And she was probably scared.
Right.
And I think that she threatened him. I think she said, I still have my black book, and I can still rock Portland if you accept this police chief thing. And I think that was the catalyst. I think that's why she disappeared that spring.
If Jenkins and the police genuinely did receive a threat, and they had to react, there's one person who would have been perfect for them to use to take that action.
The idea of how she would have been captured, because I know for a fact that Bill Bruning had called her up and said,
let's meet.
Let's get together. I haven't been with my wife for years.
Right.
You know, I'm ready.
Right.
She would have been there in an instant.
I think so too.
And so I think that he probably was the one who kidnapped her.
Mm-hmm. She ruined his career.
She destroyed his career.
She destroyed his career. And the one object that was the catalyst in Chief Jenkins basically firing him was she kept a love letter. He had written a love letter to her during one of the fairs. I think it was the state fair in Salem. Mm-hmm. And he was there, and he was working as security, and he got a piece of stationery. He wrote the date, and he called her my love, and you need to get over being blue, and blah, blah, blah. So he writes this love letter, and she kept it. And so his career was ruined.
Yeah, because he was trying to claim that nothing had happened.
Right. He said that he was just friends, and he loved her like a sister, and all of a sudden there's that one love letter. And then after he lost his star, because they didn't have badges then, they had a star. After he lost his star, he was reduced to, I think he had a job at a post office for a while, and then he had to request a letter of recommendation so that he could get the job at the post office.
Yeah. He was unemployed for a long time,
right.
But by 46, he was a special officer.
Right.
That meant he was working the night shift. He looked like a cop. He was equipped like a cop. He acted like a cop, but he was not a cop.
He was a security guard.
He was a security guard that was being paid by the downtown businesses.
A night watchman. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was called a night watchman. So basically
But he was still reporting to Jenkins.
Oh, really?
Yes.
However, all speculation and theorization aside, it means nothing if the potential victim doesn't match with the evidence, of which there's very little. What does the evidence, namely the clothing and body parts that were recovered, have to say about Anna Schrader?
And my feeling with regard to your theory that kind of extends beyond that is that she got word, because she had friends and she had police friends for a long time. Somehow she got word that she was in trouble now, and she tried to leave town because the torso's body was covered in layers of clothing that were about the same size as Anna Schrader's body. You know, she was 5'4", she weighed 144 pounds.
And if that was her suitcase,
right,
that supports that too.
Yeah, and I think she was probably going to go back to Minnesota to be with her family. And one of the things they found in the suitcase of clothing that was found nearby where the thigh was found was they found a pair of pink booties for a baby. And she had, I think, 9 siblings, and she had grandnieces, and she had a huge family in Minnesota.
And she may have had a child.
Right. When they found the clothes, they found a double A bra in the clothing, which is the smallest size bra that most women can have. I had a double A bra when I was a teenager. It's a really small bra. And most of the clothes were like, for a petite woman. And the torso was described as, when they looked at it, as being a woman who had very small breasts. Anna Schrader didn't have very large breasts.
So we know the clothing found on the torso and in the Clackamas River all fit a petite body similar to Anna Schrader's. But furthermore, the amount of clothing found suggests a woman prepared to run, which, considering the circumstances, Schrader may very well have been preparing to do. With the body parts that had been recovered, medical professionals were able to establish, within a general scope of accuracy, specifics such as the torso victim's height, weight, age, and so on. How closely did Anna Schrader match with these specifics?
The torso is estimated as being between 5'2" and 5'4". It's likely that she was 5'4". Anna Schrader was 5'4". The torso was estimated to weigh between 130 and 150 pounds. Anna Schrader weighed 144 pounds in 1929 during the lawsuits and all of the media attention. They were both white women. They both had graying, dark hair. And the medical examiner, Dr. Richardson, said that the torso could have been a woman over 50. But after they examined the remains of the torso, they said that the remains were probably between 40 and 45. But Dr. Richardson said later that the torso could also have been older than 50. Now, if Anna Schrader was the torso, she would have been about 63 years old, because she did lie about her age for years and years. She took off about 8 years of her, for her age. So in 1929, she was supposed to have been 38, but she was actually 46. And she looked 46, if you look at the photographs from the newspapers. The other thing that's interesting is that when Dr. Richardson examined the skull, he described the hair as being styled in a ringlet style, with ringlets. And when Anna Schrader was arrested, and when she was photographed in 1929, she had shoulder-length hair that she styled in ringlets. Now, during the trial, she cut it to I think it's called a sleek Marcel, which is basically a really short bob. But before that, she had shoulder-length hair that she did up in ringlets, and the skull had hair that was described as being done up in ringlets.
With the exception of the age, which is a small distinction and hardly definitive against her, Anna Schrader matches the bodily details of the victim almost perfectly. But of course, the most prominent piece of evidence recovered was the head, still caked with blackened flesh. Of prominence upon its discovery is the fact that the mouth had been forced open, exposing a set of still shining white upper teeth, which were clearly replacements. This is highly significant in terms of Anna Schrader's potential as being the victim.
There's also a photograph of Anna Schrader. It's not a very good photograph from one of the newspapers, and she's smiling, kind of looking a little smug, and you can see her teeth. When I saw that photo, I immediately thought, those are dentures. Those aren't real teeth, because they're too perfect. And then when I saw the photo of the skull and I saw the photo of the dentures, I thought, they're so similar looking. They almost look identical. Because people didn't have teeth that were that perfect, especially coming from a large Irish family. I mean, I know this from myself. My teeth are a mess. Unless you have orthodontia, you don't have perfect teeth like that unless they're dentures. So there's just a lot of really interesting similarities and parallels between the physical description of Anna Schrader and the torso, which is why I think that the torso remains were Anna Schrader.
But beyond the teeth alone, there is an astounding number of similarities between the recovered torso victim's face and the face of Anna Schrader. Both women, if we can argue they aren't the same, have rounded, almost box-shaped heads. The torso victim had tightly curled hair with bobby pins in it, very indicative of how Anna Schrader wore her hair. The torso had dark hair, like Anna's, with gray strands. While I haven't found a picture of Anna in her later years, at the age of 63, it would be anything but a surprise if her hair was not graying by that time. They are so similar in terms of their hair that in both these pictures, we can see a mix of curled hair hanging down specifically in the middle of their foreheads. Both faces have comparably high cheekbones as well, and at the base of their heads, they both have small, rounded, almost undefined chins. In both women, we also see they have low brow ridges, with brows almost seeming to invade the space of their eyes. Anna Schrader also had very thin eyebrows, and as we see on the torso victim, her eyebrows are barely discernible. The eyes themselves are remarkably similar as well, as Anna Schrader's eyes were fairly small. They seemed almost slightly embedded into her head with how her facial skin wraps around them. This matches totally with the torso victim who, despite missing much of what was left of her eyes, clearly shows signs of her eyes being slightly embedded in such a way with skin wrapped around the sockets in the same way as Anna. The nose is the only point where the two seem to differ, despite them both having straight noses with an identical rounded tip. The only way they differ is that the victim seems to have a much shorter nose, with the end located closer to her eyes than to her mouth. However, this can be explained away by the wrap seen around the victim's mouth, which runs between the nose and upper mouth, thus pushing the nose upward like one might do with their finger to create the impression of a pug nose. It's difficult to argue at this point how someone who disappeared at the same time, had enemies with motive, and who matched the victim in so many ways, many of them with incredible specificity, would not be that said victim. The deeper you get into this case, and the more you have to start considering beyond being a missing persons case, the more you start to think of Anna Schrader as possibly being the torso victim, you really have to dig deep and look at, was there anything that was very distinct about her? And one of the most distinct things in this case is you have Anna Schrader, who vanishes, never seen again, in March, roughly the same time that this torso victim was likely abducted and murdered. And you have the police scouring all over the place looking for missing persons, and yet at no time, there's no file that says Anna Schrader was ever considered to possibly be the victim. And even in the slightest of possibilities, it is insane that a woman who lived in Portland, who went missing at just the right time, it makes no sense that she was never considered as a possible victim unless you consider the overwhelming likelihood that if she was the victim, nobody wanted her name brought up, nobody wanted her found. And it's wild to think that despite her falling into obscurity, that nobody would have been concerned when she just suddenly vanished. Not one person thought to contact the authorities, file a missing persons report, and yet there's no missing persons report on record. And yet we know for a fact that at least one person out there in this crazy world was looking for her, as there were 3 different advertisements, if you will, posted in the Oregonian during the month of April. One was posted, the first one was posted April 5th, which just happened to be Anna Schrader's birthday. So there's a significance there. The second one was posted April 12th, the day that the torso was recovered. And then one more week later, April 19th, the final ad was posted. The advertisement specifically said, anybody who knows the whereabouts of Ann Schrader, let me know. The specifics of this ad, there's a clear connection, and it shows that somebody at just the right time was looking for Anna Schrader. Now, who is that person? We just don't know, and it's unlikely we ever will.
So somebody was looking for her. We know that. We don't know who that was. But if it was a friend of hers, which we suspect, they also would have filed a missing persons report. But there was no missing persons report ever open that we know of.
Right.
So it's possible that Jim Purcell suppressed that too. That he is known to have done those kinds of things.
Yeah.
He suppressed missing persons reports in 1948 in a couple of cases. He shut down. My favorite is the Tatum investigation, where they went into the Cecil Club and they arrested everybody who was in the club at the time of the murder, and the detectives were only allowed to interrogate 4 of the suspects, and Chief Purcell interrogated all of the others and filed no reports on any of his interrogations. So this is how he worked. And he was very good at shutting down county sheriff's departments. And the way he would have done it was to just tell them, don't worry about this one. Don't solve this one. We've got it covered. And there are certain reasons that he would have done that. One of them was that somebody from the police bureau was involved. And he would have done it with no qualms. That was just part of his job.
We know the Portland police were involved in the investigation, that they had motive and helped shut it down. There's no other woman in Portland that they'd have a greater motive to cover up her death and the circumstances around it than Anna Schrader. She'd embarrass them with scandal. She'd threaten them with information we know she had. And there was plenty of reason to consider her a renewed threat in 1946, with her scorned father figure, Leon Jenkins, coming back into power. The evidence is there. Beyond all probability, it is most likely that it was Anna Schrader's skinny torso that was pulled ashore from the Willamette River on April 12, 1946, to be followed by multiple future discoveries. Otherwise, where did she go? How did she vanish? If she were the victim, how did it all happen? I will now show, based on all the evidence I have on the matter, how I believe the life of Anna Schrader was taken from the time of her apprehension to the very end, the discovery of her various body parts in multiple rivers. By 1946, Anna was living in southeast Portland. Having made no qualms about taking down the Portland police years before, she could have resumed her threats around this time, especially with the news of former police chief Leon Jenkins resuming that position. One cannot deny the correlation of that event with her sudden disappearance. The Portland police decided she had to be dealt with. However, I do not believe the initial intent was to kill. But if such were to happen, it would need to be concealed. If Anna Schrader turned up dead, the first suspect would be the Portland police. But the police had a potential ace in the hole. William Bruning's life had been destroyed in relation to their affair years before. The police could have used this to lean on him, for one, but on the other hand, he may have been more than willing to help. And the police could have motivated him further vis-a-vis perhaps offering to return him to the police force, for one, among any other possibility. It's known that after years of quiet, William suddenly contacted Anna shortly before her disappearance. Coincidence? It's my position that sometime in mid to late March of 1946, William Bruning contacted Anna Schrader, possibly to reconnect. I believe that he convinced her to meet him somewhere. He most likely told her that he had reason to believe her life was in danger and that they should leave town together. Considering the mess of clothes found on and around the torso victim's remains, it suggests she packed what she could with the intention of leaving town. Anna may have been only all too happy to reconnect with William as well, especially with the death of her husband back in 1941. She packed and went to meet him, walking right into the bear trap. Wherever she did go to, there was more than just William Bruning there waiting for her. Anna was apprehended and put on notice. Shut your mouth or face the heaviest of consequences. The evidence that Anna was likely kept somewhere, alive, for a while, and even fed, motivates my belief that the initial intent was not murder. Why hold someone for a while that you're just going to kill? Why feed someone that you're just going to kill? She was given her ultimatum, but being Anna Schrader, independent, outspoken, fearless, she not only didn't take their deal, but likely belittled the odds that they would even pull through with such a threat. Such left those involved with no choice. Whatever the final catalyst may have been to the attack, someone, maybe William Bruning, maybe someone else, lurched at Anna and beat her head in. The trauma that caused her death. With one of their greatest adversaries silenced, the next complication was how to dispose of the body. The depositing of the victim's remains in this case reeks of the methods of organized crime. Put someone's feet in concrete and toss them in the river, never to be seen again. Anna Schrader's body parts are thus found in the river, wrapped in weights, the intent to sink them, never to be found. Had the man in charge of weighing these parts down done his duty, this case wouldn't exist today. Beyond just depositing the body, dismembering it, breaking it into smaller pieces, would make the job of getting rid of it all the more easier. Depositing different parts in different places could also create the impression of multiple murder victims, sending detectives on a series of unsolvable wild goose chases. After dismemberment, the body parts of Anna Schrader were wrapped up and, for the most part, placed into burlap feed sacks, concealing them as they were transported. This is where the theories scatter. How was Anna Schrader's body parts deposited? My answer? The Union Pacific Railroad lines that traveled south of Portland. Unlike transporting Anna's body parts via automobiles, wherein it would be easier to be seen or spotted near the discovery sites, it would be as simple as transporting these sacks to an open boxcar. One could travel, concealed, unnoticed, to the deposit spots, aka rivers. Considering the fact that the torso alone likely weighed some 50 pounds, it's improbable anyone would have dragged it down to the river, but rather it was easily pushed off a train as it crossed the bridge. The prevalence of using bridges to deposit body parts is clearly present in this case, but not just with the head and torso that were found in Oak Grove, but also the left thigh, which was discovered in the Clackamas River. This left thigh was found 1 mile downstream from a railroad bridge that crossed the same river. Just 2 miles down that same line from the bridge, the footprints leading down to the river where the arms and right torso were deposited. Both the line that crossed the bridge in Oak Grove and the line that traveled down through Oregon City come together at an interesting point north of there. The Brooklyn rail yards. Oddly enough, where Anna Schrader's own husband worked most of his life.
I'm standing along a somewhat secluded road, literally just due east of the Brooklyn rail yards, which are located directly behind me. This particular area, the Brooklyn rail yards, I personally believe is the location where the body parts of the victim were transported, most likely through the use of one or multiple vehicles, were transported nearby these railroad lines. The sacks containing the human remains were then transported to any number of train cars that would have been along here. It would have been very easy to simply pull up here. Nobody's around to see you. This is a very secluded area now. It would have been even more so back in 1946. They pull up, sneak the sacks off the car, move them onto a train car, an empty train car. Nobody is seen. The train takes off heading due south because that is the direction these lines go. This is where all the lines come together. This would be the most likely place that the parts were transported onto a train. And you include the fact that this is southeast Portland. And by 1946, Anna Schrader just happened to live in southeast.
3 miles south of the Brooklyn rail yards, these lines split. And how they split is what makes these particular rail yards a perfect spot to hop a train if one was to disperse the remains of Anna Schrader.
I'm now along a railroad spur that actually is only a few miles south of where the Brooklyn rail yards are, where Anna Schrader's husband worked. This particular line breaks off, hooks slightly east, and cuts through Milwaukee and ultimately reaches Oregon City, where it passes right by the Blue Heron Paper Mill, which is the same railroad line where police officers searching the area after the bag containing the arms and the right torso were found. That's where they saw footprints leading from the railroad line down to the river. This is that same line. And what's really interesting, only about a quarter of a mile to a mile up this way is where the line breaks. This particular line hooks east, another one hooks slightly west. I'm now standing along this particular railroad stretch that also comes from north at the Brooklyn rail yards. While the line I was at before hooks slightly east, this particular line right here is the one that hooks west, and it cuts right through downtown Milwaukee, where it enters Oak Grove and then ultimately crosses a bridge into Lake Oswego. This, of course, being the same bridge that it's been theorized at least the head and the torso of the murder victim were thrown from. In the aftermath of all cases, whether it was the parts deposited in Oak Grove, into the Clackamas River, or into the Willamette River by Willamette Falls, in all cases, the perpetrator or perpetrators would have had the luxury of either staying on the train line for a long enough period of time that the train would have ultimately been out in the middle of nowhere. It would have been easy to escape or easy to be picked up undetected. And just as well, in both cases, for the individual who went down into Oregon City, or individuals, they could have easily just blended in with the crowd in Oregon City or been picked up in there and gone unnoticed. And in the case of Oak Grove, once you cross that bridge, you roll right into downtown Lake Oswego, where also, whoever the perpetrator or perpetrators were, they could have just gotten off the train and blended in with the crowd, or gotten off the train and gotten picked up. It would have been a cinch in any aspect to get away with this, especially if it was nighttime. And so, Anna Schrader disappeared forever. And so did her killers, never to be formally identified or charged. Hours became days, days became months,
and months, years. With time, things are so easily forgotten, even when it's the brutal torture killing of a simple soul. And as we wait and we wonder about the mysterious disappearance and death of such an iconic and controversial socialite, what could have happened? Such is left to the waters of the Willamette River to answer.
Jim Purcell, the way he would have done it was to just tell them, don't worry about this one. Don't solve this one. We've got it covered. And there are certain reasons that he would have done that. One of them was that somebody from the police bureau was involved. And he would have done it with no qualms. That was just part of his job. All of these unsolved murders, they're unsolved for a reason sometimes.